I built that greenhouse by hand. 12 weekends. Cedar frame, copper fittings I bent myself. So when I came home for a forgotten pruning saw and found my business partner Rick's white F-250 in my driveway, Tillerman Landscaping on the door, I walked straight to the greenhouse and grabbed the handle. It didn't turn. Someone had installed a deadbolt on the inside of a door I hung myself. I didn't knock, walked to the shed, quote, sat on the workbench, pulled up the security feed on my phone. Please subscribe and share where in the world you're watching from right now. Your support keeps these stories coming. Let me explain how I got here. That summer, 1990, I pushed a secondhand Craftsman mower up and down driveways in Peoria for $10 a lawn. My father drove a city bus. My mother cleaned office buildings on the east side. Nobody in my family had ever owned a business, but I kept a spiral notebook in my back pocket where I tracked every dollar earned and every dollar spent. By the time I turned 19, that notebook showed $11,400 in savings. I bought a Skag commercial walk behind and a rusted F-150 with a trailer hitch, and Tillerman Landscaping existed. No office, no partner, no business cards, just a mower, a truck, and a kid who showed up early and left late. Nearly 30 years later, the company runs 11 employees, 6 trucks, and enough equipment to fill a warehouse bay off Route 29. Residential design, commercial maintenance, hardscape installation. Flagstone patios, retaining walls, drainage systems. I can look at a half-acre lot and tell you the soil grade, the water table depth, and which trees will survive the first frost. That's not a gift. That's 29 years of digging holes and watching what grows. I met Janine at Midwest Federal in 2005. She worked the teller window, sharp blue eyes behind the glass partition. I handed her a check stained with topsoil and dried sweat. She held it between 2 fingers like it might be contagious, looked at my hands, looked at the check, and laughed. Not mean, just surprised. Like she'd never seen someone carry that much dirt into a bank. I married her 10 months later. I was 29, she was 27, and still the prettiest woman I'd ever talked to. We bought the ranch house on Prospect Road with savings from 6 years of 60-hour weeks and a fixed-rate mortgage we barely qualified for. Single story, 3 bedrooms, half-acre lot, with mature oaks along the fence line. The house needed everything. The hardwood floors took 2 weekends on my knees, sanding and staining until my shoulders locked up. I retiled the kitchen myself, white subway tile with dark grout, because Janine tore a page from a magazine and said she wanted something like that. Built the back deck from pressure-treated pine, 16 by 12, overlooking the lot where I kept my work trailers. Everything I put into that house, I put in with my hands. The greenhouse came later. 12 weekends, start to finish. I framed it with western red cedar I sourced from a mill in Oregon, cut every joint on my table saw in the garage. The garage smelled like a sawmill for 3 months. Tempered glass panels, each one 200 pounds, that I lifted into place with a come-along winch and bolted to the cedar with stainless steel brackets. Copper fittings on the irrigation lines because copper doesn't corrode, and I was tired of replacing plastic joints every spring. I ran electric for grow lights, poured a gravel drainage floor, hung a thermometer by the door. I grew shiitake logs in the dark corner, inoculated with spawn plugs I ordered from a catalog in Wisconsin. Tomato starts along the south wall. On weekends, when the crew had the jobs covered, I'd drive out to the timber past Sugar Creek and forage for chanterelles, morels in April, hen of the woods in September. I kept a leather-bound journal with pressed spore prints and pencil sketches of every species I identified. 63 at last count. My guys on the crew thought it was strange. A man who hauls stone for a living, spending his Sundays with a field guide and a paper bag. I didn't mind. When I finished the greenhouse, I installed 4 weatherproof cameras on the property. Same system I put on every client site. Monitors irrigation cycles, catches frost alerts, records everything to the cloud with timestamps. Standard practice. My phone could pull up the live feed from any job site in Peoria County. The house cameras were no different. Rick Sobieski came on as partner 11 years ago. 40% to my 60. I'd built the company alone, but I was drowning in the business side. Scheduling, invoicing, client meetings. Rick was broad through the shoulders, loud in a room before he opened his mouth. Room-filling voice, firm handshake, spray tan in January, white teeth that cost more than my first truck. He remembered every client's kid's name, every anniversary, every dog breed. The man could close a deal over a handshake and a beer. I stayed in the field. Rick stayed in the office and the restaurants and the networking events. The split made sense. I built the product. He sold it. Phil Dougherty, my oldest client, a retired electrician on the east side, watched the company grow from a kid with a walk-behind mower to 6 trucks and a warehouse bay. He'd sit on his porch while I worked his property and say the same thing every season. You built something, son. Don't let anybody tell you different. My son Colton started working summers on the crew when he turned 15. Quiet kid, good hands. He'd load the trailer without being asked and sweep the job site before I told him to. I taught him to read soil. Grab a fistful, squeeze, watch how it crumbles. Same way my father taught me to check tire pressure on the bus lot. Hands-on, no shortcuts. That was my life on Prospect Road. The house I refinished board by board. The greenhouse I framed with cedar and copper. The business I grew from a spiral notebook and a used mower. The cameras I installed because that's what a careful man does. The boy learning the trade on my crew. Everything I owned, I built with these hands. I treated things right and they lasted. That's what I believed. Janine stopped cooking in February. Not all at once. First, it was the weeknight dinners that went from scratch meals to frozen lasagna to nothing. Then the weekend projects disappeared. She used to spend Sunday afternoons in the kitchen with a glass of wine and a recipe she'd bookmarked from some food blog, filling the house with garlic and rosemary and whatever spice she'd ordered off the internet that month. 47 spice jars lined the shelf above the stove. Matching glass, hand-printed labels, alphabetized from allspice to za'atar. She hadn't opened one in 6 weeks. I noticed the jars every morning when I made coffee. 47 jars, not one opened in 6 weeks. Around the same time, the restaurant comments started. Rick told me about this Italian place in Bloomington, she said one evening. I was at the kitchen table, boots still on, reviewing an estimate for the Henderson retaining wall. Pencil marks on graph paper, soil sample bags lined up by the salt shaker. Real tablecloths, candles, not a chain. I looked up. Sounds nice. We should go somewhere like that. Not Applebee's. What's wrong with Applebee's? Nothing, Gus. Nothing's wrong with anything. She said it the way she said most things that spring. Flat. A door closing without being slammed. I went back to the estimate. The ring came off 3 months before I found the deadbolt. I was brushing my teeth one Tuesday night, and she reached past me for the floss. Her left hand bare. No ring, no tan line where the ring should have been, which meant it had been off long enough for the skin to even out. I looked at her reflection in the mirror. Your ring, I said. It was pinching. I think my fingers swelled from the heat. It was March, 42 degrees that day. I checked the weather every morning for frost alerts. I spit, rinsed, put my toothbrush in the holder. Didn't press it. A month later, my mother had a stroke. Lorraine Tillerman, 72 years old, 3 blocks from our house on Prospect Road. The stroke hit her right side. Partial paralysis, slurred speech. The doctors at OSF said the first 72 hours would tell them what she'd get back and what she wouldn't. I spent those 72 hours in a plastic chair that stuck to my arms in the heat, under fluorescent lights that buzzed like a bad ballast. Janine came the first day, stayed 40 minutes, checked her phone 11 times. I counted. She said the hospital smell gave her a headache and left. The days after that, I split my time between the hospital and job sites. Up at 5, crew dispatched by 6:30, at Lorraine's bedside by noon, back to the field by 3. 60-hour weeks became 70-hour weeks. I ate from vending machines and gas stations. Rick called me the third day. "Hey buddy, listen. Don't worry about the property. I'll swing by the house, check the irrigation timers, make sure nothing freezes. You just take care of your mom." Quote, "Appreciate it," I said. Generous offer. At home, Janine's phone stayed face down on every surface. Kitchen counter, coffee table, bathroom vanity. Always face down. She started taking calls in the bedroom with the door shut, and when I walked in once without knocking, she ended the call mid-sentence. "What do you need?" Like I'd walked into the wrong house. One evening I came home at 4 instead of 6. I'd finished the Doherty job early and skipped the hospital because Lorraine was sleeping when I called the nurse's station. Janine was in the kitchen. She spun around when the back door opened. "Why didn't you text?" "Didn't think I needed to." "I could have had plans, Gus." She left the room. I heard the bedroom door close. I stood in my own kitchen, boots on the mat, hands smelling like mulch, and tried to figure out what I'd done wrong by coming home to my own house. I couldn't. A week later, my son Colton and I were eating dinner. Janine was at Pilates. Colton pushed his fork through a pile of reheated rice and said, without looking up, "Dad, how come Rick's truck was at the house yesterday?" "When?" "Half day, got home around noon. His truck was in the driveway." "Checking the irrigation," I said. "Oh? Okay." Colton went back to his rice. I finished my plate, washed both dishes, wiped the counter. Rick's white F-250 with Tillerman Landscaping on the door. Parked in my driveway on a Wednesday afternoon. During a school half-day when Colton came home early and I was supposed to be at the hospital until evening. I filed it. The following Sunday I drove to Lorraine's house. She was on the mend by then, home with a physical therapist 3 times a week. I brought her groceries and changed the furnace filter while she sat in her chair by the front window. The chair faced Prospect Road. From that window, you could see the first 3 houses on the block, including mine. She watched me put the filter back. Then she said, "Sit down a minute." I sat on the ottoman across from her. She looked at me the way she looked at everything, direct, patient, unhurried. The same woman who raised 4 kids and never raised her voice. "That woman stopped wearing her ring 3 months ago," Lorraine said. I didn't answer. "And that truck's been in your driveway 6 times since I've been home." She picked up her tea and took a sip. She didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. I drove back to Prospect Road with both hands on the wheel, pulled into the driveway. Janine's car was there. Rick's truck was not. I went inside and changed out of my boots. I was kneeling in Phil Dougherty's backyard on the east side of Peoria, setting flagstone into a sandbed I'd leveled that morning. The pruning saw was sitting on my workbench at home. 2:30 in the afternoon. I'd been cutting back the overgrown arborvitae along Phil's fence line before lunch, switched to the patio work after, and left the saw on the bench next to my thermos. Phil was inside watching a Cubs game. Cubs were down 3 in the 4th. I could hear the play-by-play through his screen door. I brushed the sand off my knees, told myself I'd grab the saw and be back in 20 minutes. The drive from Phil's place to Prospect Road takes 11 minutes if you catch the light on Knoxville. I caught it. pulled onto my street at 2:43. I know because I checked the dashboard clock when I saw Rick's truck. White F-250, Tillerman Landscaping on the door in the green and black lettering I designed myself. Parked in my driveway, behind Janine's Camry, angled like he'd pulled in fast and hadn't bothered to straighten the wheel. Rick had no scheduled reason to be at my house. No irrigation work on the calendar. No client delivery routed through Prospect Road. I'd checked the company schedule that morning the way I checked it every morning, over coffee at 5:15 with the kitchen light on and the rest of the house dark. Nothing on the board for my address. I parked on the street. Didn't pull into the driveway behind him. I sat in the truck for maybe 10 seconds, both hands on the wheel, looking at his F-250. My name on the side of it, in my driveway, at 2:43 on a Tuesday. I got out and walked past Rick's truck to the greenhouse. Glare everywhere. The afternoon sun hit the tempered glass panels. I could see shapes moving behind it, but couldn't make them out. I reached for the door handle. Cedar frame. The same handle I'd mounted with 2 stainless bolts and a backing plate I cut from scrap aluminum. The handle didn't turn. I pulled again, not jammed, locked. I crouched and looked at the mechanism. A deadbolt, brass finish, installed on the interior side with fresh screws in the cedar. The sawdust from the drill holes was still on the gravel at the threshold. Someone had bored through my cedar frame with a 1-inch spade bit, mounted the deadbolt, and locked it from inside. I built that door. I knew every screw hole, every grain pattern in the cedar, every place where the wood had checked from the first winter's cold. This lock was not mine. I stood up, stepped back from the door. My boots crunched on the gravel that had spilled past the drainage bed. Inside the greenhouse, the shapes behind the glass stopped moving. I didn't knock, didn't pound, didn't shout. I turned around and walked to the shed. The shed sits 10 yards from the greenhouse, far side of the deck. I pulled the door open, stepped inside. Motor oil and cedar shavings. A push mower hanging from wall hooks. My workbench along the back wall, the pruning saw right where I'd left it next to the thermos. I didn't touch the saw. Battery at 12%. I plugged my phone into the wall charger, opened the security app, and tapped the greenhouse camera. The live feed loaded in 3 seconds. Rick's truck in the driveway, shot from the camera angle I'd mounted on the southeast eave. The greenhouse door closed. Nobody visible outside. The deadbolt was new. The visits were not. I scrolled back. 1 hour. 2 hours. Rick's truck arriving at 1:18, pulling in fast, same angle I was looking at now. Rick stepping out, walking to the greenhouse. Janine opening the door from inside. The door closing behind him. I kept scrolling. Yesterday. The day before. Last week. Rick's truck, same time window. Always arriving within an hour of me leaving for a job site. Always the same camera angle, the same driveway, the same Tillerman Landscaping lettering catching the light as he walked past his own company name toward my greenhouse. I scrolled faster. 2 weeks back. 3, a month, 6 weeks. The timestamps kept going. I stopped on the week my mother had her stroke. The week I spent in a plastic hospital chair under bad lights while she fought to move her right hand again. Rick's truck arriving at the house 53 minutes after I left for OSF Medical. The next day, the day after that, every day that week. Every day I sat with Lorraine and held her left hand because her right one wouldn't close. I sat on the workbench in the dim shed and watched the phone screen cycle through 4 months of footage. The timestamps ran in a column down the side. Date, arrival time, departure time. A ledger. The same kind of ledger I'd kept in a spiral notebook since I was a kid, tracking every dollar earned and every dollar spent. I closed the app, unplugged the phone, put it in my pocket. The pruning saw sat on the bench beside me. I picked it up, walked out of the shed, crossed the yard to my truck. Rick's F-250 was still in the driveway. My name still on the door. I drove back to Phil Dougherty's place. 11 minutes. The light on Knoxville was red this time. I waited. Phil's screen door was still open. The Cubs game had gone to the 7th inning. I set the pruning saw by the arborvitae, knelt back down at the patio edge, and picked up the next piece of flagstone. Checked the level, tapped it into the sandbed with a rubber mallet. I finished that patio before dark. Every stone seated, every joint swept, every edge tamped clean. Phil came out as I was loading the truck. "Looks good, son. Appreciate it," I said. I drove home. Rick's truck was gone. The greenhouse door was closed. The deadbolt, I assumed, retracted from the inside and invisible again. I went in, took off my boots, washed my hands, ate leftover chicken standing at the counter. Janine was in the bedroom with the door shut. The 47 spice jars sat above the stove in their alphabetical row. Not one of them had moved. I dried my hands and hung the towel on the oven handle. Same hook, same towel, same kitchen I'd tiled with my own hands. The next 2 weeks I worked the same schedule. Up at 5, coffee in the dark kitchen, crew dispatched by 6:30, 10 hours on job sites. Nothing changed on the surface. What changed was the evenings. Every night after dinner, Janine shut in the bedroom with her phone, Colton doing homework at the kitchen table. I walked out to the shed, closed the door, turned on the workbench light, plugged in my phone, and opened the legal pad. Yellow-lined paper. The same brand I'd used for 29 years of job estimates. I drew a calendar grid across the first 2 pages, March through June, and started filling in what I knew. The security app stores footage by date with motion detection tags. Every time something moves in the camera's field, it flags the timestamp. I didn't need to watch hours of empty driveway. I just needed the flags. March 14th. Rick's truck arrived at 10:47 a.m., 53 minutes after I left for OSF Medical. Lorraine couldn't close her right hand that morning. The therapist said fine motor recovery would take months. I was in that plastic chair holding her left hand. Rick was in my driveway. March 15th. Truck at 11:01 a.m. March 16th. 10:38. March 17th. Topic: 11,001. 4 straight days that first week. Every day I was at my mother's bedside. Rick drove to my house. I wrote the timestamps on the legal pad in the same tight handwriting I used for soil measurements. Date, arrival, departure, duration. The column grew. March bled into April. April into May, May into June. 41 flagged entries across 4 months. The pen scratched against the yellow paper. Outside the shed wall, I could hear the faint bass of whatever Colton was listening to through his headphones at the kitchen table. Coffee going cold on the workbench beside me. I pulled the fleet management logs on the 3rd evening. Every Tillerman Landscaping truck carries GPS for routing and mileage billing. Standard system, log in through the company portal. Rick's F-250, unit number 6, showed its location history in 15-minute intervals. I cross-referenced the GPS coordinates against my calendar. On April 9th, Rick's timesheet showed him at the Henderson property from 9 to 3. The GPS put his truck at 1847 Prospect Road from 10,022 to 111.4, 3 hours and 52 minutes. On April 23rd, his schedule listed a site visit in Morton. The GPS showed Prospect Road, 11,007 to 12,048, May 2nd. Prospect Road, May 9th. Prospect Road, May 14th. Prospect Road. I mapped the pattern on the calendar with a red pen. Rick visited on days when my schedule showed long jobs on the east side or commercial sites in Washington. Never on days when I had short residential work close to home. Never on days when an early return was possible. He'd studied my schedule the way I study soil composition, with attention, with patience. The way you study something you plan to use. I put the legal pad in the drawer under my field journal and locked it. The following Saturday, I drove to Phil Dougherty's house. He was on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching his neighbor's kid ride a bike in circles. I sat in the other chair without being invited. Phil and I had that kind of history. Phil, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. He looked at his coffee. His hands were liver-spotted, thick-knuckled, an electrician's hands. He already knew what I was going to say. I could see it in the way his shoulders pulled in. You saw them, I said, at that restaurant in Bloomington. Phil set the mug down on the railing. 4 months ago, maybe 5. I was there with my sister for her birthday. They were at a corner table. Rick and Janine, yeah. His voice cracked on the word. I should have told you, son. I picked up the phone twice. Kept thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was business. But they weren't there for business. No, I said. I'm sorry, Gus. I nodded. Would you put that in writing if I asked? Today, Phil said. Right now. I'll write it right now. I drove home with Phil's signed statement on the passenger seat. Handwritten on the back of a hardware store receipt. Date, location, what he saw. His signature at the bottom, the letters shaking where his hand had trembled. That night, I drove 3 blocks past the house and parked at the gas station on the corner of Prospect and Miller. Engine off, windows down. The fluorescent light from the pumps threw long shadows across the cab. I called Tammy Sobieski, Rick's wife. Auburn hair, tortoiseshell glasses, the kind of face that looked honest. We'd been at the same barbecues and holiday parties for 11 years. She answered on the second ring. Tammy, it's Gus Tillerman. A pause. Hi, Gus. Guarded. I have security footage of Rick at my house. 4 months of it. Timestamps, GPS logs from his company truck. I'm not guessing. The line went quiet for a long time. I found a receipt, she said. Her voice dropped lower. 8 months ago, Italian restaurant in Bloomington. He said it was a client dinner. I checked the company calendar. There was no client dinner. I know the restaurant, I said. I've been putting money aside since then. Separate account, just in case. She exhaled. I kept telling myself I was paranoid. That it was nothing. It's not nothing, no, she said. It's not. We talked for 40 minutes. Why, she had the receipt. I had the footage, the GPS, Phil's statement. When we hung up, the gas station lot was empty and the fluorescent light was buzzing against the dark. Monday morning, I walked into Brenda Koss's office in downtown Peoria. Mid-50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, no photographs on her desk. Family law, 30 years. She didn't shake my hand. She pointed at the chair across from her and said, Sit. Tell me what you have. I laid it out, the legal pad, the GPS printouts, Phil's statement, Tammy's receipt, the security footage on my phone. Brenda put on her glasses and reviewed each document in order, turning pages with one finger, making no sound. The second hand on the clock behind her head was loud in that quiet office. Then she opened the partnership agreement. The original document, 11 years old, that I'd brought in a manila folder. She read for 6 minutes. I watched the clock. She took off her glasses. Page 14, Section 9, B. Morality clause, she said. Conduct by either partner that constitutes a breach of personal trust or brings material disrepute to the business entity triggers a forced dissolution of the offending partner's equity stake. Buyout terms are set by the agreement, not negotiated. Rick signed that, I said. He signed it. Brenda tapped the signature page. and the buyout formula favors the remaining partner. His 40% gets valued at book, not market. Gus, if this footage shows what you say it shows, Rick Sobieski loses his stake in your company on your terms. She closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. Build it tight, she said. Every timestamp, every GPS coordinate. When you're ready, bring me the package and I'll draft the notice. I picked up the folder and walked out into the Peoria sun. The manila envelope was warm in my hand. The street noise came back in stages, traffic, a horn, someone laughing outside the courthouse across the block. 11 years ago, Rick signed a document without reading it, the same way he parked a truck with my name on it in my driveway without thinking. Now both of those decisions belonged to me. Tammy and I arrived at the restaurant 40 minutes before everyone else. Private room in the back of a steakhouse on War Memorial Drive. I'd reserved it for 8. Rick wouldn't question the empty chairs. He'd assume more people were coming. White tablecloth, bread basket, water glasses already filled. The hostess had set up an easel with a foam board that read Tillerman Landscaping, 11 years in green marker. Tammy made that sign. She dotted the exclamation point with a smiley face. I looked at it for a second too long, then turned to the laptop. I opened it at the head of the table and plugged in the HDMI cable to the wall-mounted screen. Tested the connection twice. The slideshow loaded clean. 32 slides. The first 18 were real. Crew photos from job sites, the Henderson retaining wall, Phil Dougherty's finished patio, a shot of me and Rick at the warehouse signing the lease 9 years ago. Company milestones. Revenue charts. The kind of thing you'd expect at a business dinner. Slide 19 was the greenhouse camera, March 14th, 10:47 a.m. Tammy sat across from me, hands folded on the tablecloth. Auburn hair pulled back, tortoiseshell glasses, a simple navy blouse. She looked at the screen, then at me. "You ready?" she asked. "Been ready," I said. Rick came through the door at 6:15. Polo shirt stretched across his shoulders, chunky silver watch catching the overhead light, spray tan holding up despite the season. He had a bottle of wine in one hand and his other arm already extended for the handshake. Gus, big guy, he clapped my shoulder hard enough to shift my weight. 11 years. Can you believe it? Feels like yesterday I was begging you to let me in the door. He laughed and scanned the room. Why, Tammy, looking good. Where's the rest of the crew? It kept it small, I said. Just the partners and wives. Janine arrived 10 minutes later. Fitted blouse, tailored jeans, French tips on her nails. She kissed my cheek the way you'd greet a stranger at a fundraiser. No hand on my arm, no lean into it. Just lips and air. She sat 2 chairs from Rick and crossed her legs. Her left hand rested on the table. Bare ring finger, we ordered. Steaks, salads, a second bottle of wine Rick insisted on. He told a story about closing the Mendez contract that lasted 9 minutes. I timed it on the clock behind his head. Mendez tried to lowball me. I said, "Frank, you're not buying a truck. You're buying peace of mind." Signed that afternoon. He looked around the table for approval. Tammy cut her steak into small pieces and ate without looking up. At 7:12, I pushed my chair back and stood. The silverware stopped moving. "I want to thank everyone for being here," I said. 11 years of partnership. I put something together to mark the occasion. Rick grinned. Speech and a slideshow? Gus Tillerman going Hollywood on us. I clicked the laptop. The first 18 slides played at 5-second intervals. Crew photos, job sites. The warehouse lease signing. Rick nodded along, pointing at the screen. "That's the Henderson job. 35 grand. I closed that one over a handshake." He looked around the table for approval. Slide 19 loaded. The air conditioning hummed. Nobody moved. The greenhouse camera, wide angle. My driveway on Prospect Road. A white F-250 with Tillerman Landscaping on the door, parked behind Janine's Camry. The timestamp in the lower right corner read March 14, 10:47 a.m. Rick's hand stopped mid-gesture. His fingers curled. March 14th, I said. My mother had her stroke that week. I was at OSF Medical. Your GPS puts your truck at my house for over 3 hours. Slide 20. March 15th. 11,012 a.m. Same truck. Same driveway. Slide 21. March 16th. 10,038. Gus, Rick started. I was checking the irrigation timer. You asked me to. April 9th, I said. Your timesheet shows the Henderson property, 9 to 3. GPS shows Prospect Road, 10,022 to 1,004, 3 hours and 52 minutes checking an irrigation timer. Janine's hand moved to her left ring finger. Her thumb pressed the bare skin where the band used to sit. She didn't speak. The slides kept advancing. April, May, June. 41 timestamps stacking on the screen. Rick's truck in my driveway, over and over. The company name I designed catching the light at the same angle every time. Tammy set down her fork and adjusted her glasses. She watched the screen the way I watched it, patient, already past the surprise. 11 years, buddy. We built this together. You know me. Rick's voice had dropped. The room-filling volume was gone. His white veneers disappeared behind a closed mouth. Phil Doherty saw you at the Italian restaurant in Bloomington, I said. Corner table, 4 months ago. He put it in writing. Tammy reached into her purse. She pulled out a receipt, folded once, edges soft from handling, and set it on the tablecloth in front of Rick. Bloomington. 8 months ago. The restaurant Rick told her was a client dinner. Rick stared at the receipt. His jaw worked once. Twice, no sound. The slides had stopped on the last image. The greenhouse door. The camera caught the Deadbolt installation from the interior angle. Fresh screws in the cedar frame I'd cut on my table saw. Sawdust on the gravel floor I'd poured by hand. Janine's jaw set. She looked at the folder, not at Rick. Her sharp blue eyes moved across the tablecloth like she was reading something written there. I reached under the table and pulled out a manila folder, set it on the tablecloth, and slid it across to Rick. The folder contained the original Tillerman-Sobieski partnership agreement, page 14 flagged with a yellow tab. Section 9B, the morality clause. His signature at the bottom, the one he never bothered to read. Brenda Koss's enforcement letter sat on top, printed on her firm letterhead. Rick opened the folder. Read for 10 seconds. His spray tan couldn't hide what happened to the color underneath. The room was quiet. The bread basket sat untouched. The second bottle of wine stood open and warming. Somewhere past the private room door, the restaurant hummed with noise, glasses, and laughter, and a life that hadn't just ended. The ice in the water glasses had melted. Nobody had touched them. Rick's attorney was a man named Dale Henshaw. Narrow tie, scuffed briefcase, an office above a dry cleaner on Main Street. I know this because Brenda Koss told me. She also told me that Henshaw spent 3 days looking for a way around the morality clause and found nothing. He called this morning, Brenda said. We were in her office, the same fluorescent lights, the same carpet. His exact words were, "The clause is enforceable." My client signed it. That's it? That's it? Henshaw's advising Rick to accept the forced buyout rather than litigate. Litigation would cost Rick more than his stake is worth. I looked at the partnership agreement on her desk. The same document I'd carried out of this office weeks ago. Page 14, Section 9, B. Rick's signature at the bottom. What are the buyout terms? Book value, not market. The agreement specifies. She opened the page and ran her finger along the line. His 40% valued at book comes to roughly a third of what it would sell for on the open market. That's the formula you agreed to 11 years ago. He signed it. The trucks, the equipment, the warehouse bay off Route 29. That's what book value counted. Not the client relationships. Not the reputation. Not 29 years of showing up early and leaving late. Rick Sobieski's 40% of Tillerman Landscaping dissolved on a Thursday afternoon in Brenda's office. His attorney sat beside him. Rick wore a polo shirt, untucked, no watch. I hadn't seen him without that chunky silver watch in 11 years. He signed the dissolution papers without looking at me. His pen scratched the same signature line where he'd signed the original agreement, the one he never read. Brenda collected the documents. Henshaw collected his briefcase. Rick stood up, pushed in his chair, and walked out. No handshake, no speech. No buddy or big guy or chief. The door closed behind him. Tillerman Landscaping belonged to me, 100%. The same way it had when I was 19 with a used mower and a spiral notebook. Colton didn't ask questions. He loaded the trailer in the morning and swept the site before dark. Same as always. I kept him out of the details because a 16-year-old doesn't need to carry his father's problems on the job. He carried enough. The client base never wavered. Phil Dougherty called the day after the buyout was finalized. You need anything, son? Extra hands, referrals, whatever. I'm good, Phil. Appreciate it. The Henderson account stayed. The Mendez contract stayed. Every residential client on the east side, every commercial maintenance deal, every HOA agreement Rick used to brag about closing. They stayed because they'd hired the man who built the patios and the walls and the drainage systems. Not the man who told stories about closing them over handshakes. I heard through the supply house on Route 29 that Rick tried to start his own operation, called it Sobieski Outdoor Services, printed business cards, rented a storage unit for equipment he didn't have. He made the rounds at the networking events he used to attend on my dime, shaking hands, buying drinks, calling people buddy. By fall, the storage unit was empty and the business cards were in a drawer. A salesman with nothing on the truck. Janine's attorney filed for a 50-50 split of marital assets. Standard opening in Illinois. No fault state, no fault math. Brenda countered with the same footage. The same GPS logs, the same timestamps that had ended Rick's partnership. The footage establishes a timeline of conduct that influenced the disposition of marital resources, Brenda told me in her office. She spoke the way she always spoke. Bullet points, no filler. Illinois doesn't punish adultery in divorce proceedings, but it does account for dissipation of marital assets. Money, time, and resources directed toward the affair during the marriage. That's dissipation. She opened a folder. I've also entered Lorraine Tillerman's statement regarding the wedding ring. 3 months before discovery. Establishes the timeline of deliberate disengagement from the marriage. My mother's words. That woman stopped wearing her ring 3 months ago. In a legal record now. Downtown Peoria. Janine's attorney reviewed the evidence package and came back with a revised proposal. She'd take the Camry, her personal savings, and a reduced share of the marital property. No claim on the business. No claim on the house. The house I'd tiled and sanded and decked myself. The divorce finalized 8 weeks after the dinner. Janine signed the papers at her attorney's office across town. I signed at Brenda's. We never sat in the same room again. Tammy filed for divorce 3 days after the buyout. She used the separate account she'd been building for 8 months. Brenda took her case at a reduced rate. Professional courtesy, Brenda called it when I asked. Tammy walked out of her marriage with her savings, her dental practice income, custody of her 2 kids, and the knowledge that she'd been right about the receipt from Bloomington. She texted me that evening. One line, "Thank you, Gus." I typed back, "You were ready." Rick's world contracted. Word travels in a town like Peoria. Rick and Janine each told their version, and Tammy told hers, and the story carried itself home. In a town where a man's name is built on reliability and handshakes, Rick Sobieski's name carried a different weight now. The guy who slept with his partner's wife in his partner's greenhouse, while driving a truck with his partner's name on the door. The barbecue invitations stopped. The fantasy football league filled his spot. The people who used to laugh at his jokes crossed the street at the hardware store. I didn't track his decline. I didn't need to. Peoria is a small town with a long memory. The greenhouse stood empty for 3 weeks. I walked out there on a Saturday morning, crouched at the door, and unscrewed the deadbolt with a Phillips head. 4 screws. Brass hardware, cheap grade, the kind you buy at the checkout aisle. I dropped it in the trash can by the shed. The spade bit hole in the cedar I filled with epoxy and sanded flush. You could see the patch if you knew where to look, but the frame was solid. I checked the irrigation lines, adjusted the grow lights, and set a new tray of tomato starts along the south wall. The shiitake logs in the dark corner needed turning. I turned them. On a Tuesday morning in August, I drove to the Tillerman Landscaping yard off Route 29. The white F-250, unit number 6, sat in the lot where Rick's crew lead had parked it the day before. I walked to the driver's side. Tillerman Landscaping in the green and black lettering I'd designed myself. The same truck that appeared in 41 timestamps on my security feed. The same door that carried my name up my driveway while Rick walked past it toward my greenhouse. I opened the cab, cologne and fast food wrappers. I cleaned out the center console, the glove box, the door pockets, protein bar wrappers, a pen from a hotel in Bloomington, a fantasy football draft sheet from last September. I threw it all in the dumpster. I drove the truck through the wash bay, ran it through twice. Then I parked it in the fleet line between units 4 and 5, walked to my own truck, and drove to Phil Dougherty's house to finish a retaining wall. I had an estimate due by Friday and 3 loads of limestone coming in the morning. The F-250 sat in the fleet line with the rest of the trucks. Same lettering, same logo, one more vehicle in the row. It didn't carry anything extra anymore, just the logo and the work ahead. If my story matters to you, tap like and rate it from 1 to 10. Tell me what you think. Thank you. 6 months later, I sat on the back deck with a cup of coffee. My son Colton pushed the mower across the half-acre lot in straight, overlapping rows. 16 years old, he didn't miss edges. Didn't leave strips. He'd learned to read the grain of the grass the way I taught him to read soil, by feel, by repetition, by showing up and doing it again until his hands knew before his head did. The oaks along the fence line had turned. Gold and copper against a sky going pale at the edges. The air carried cut grass and the faint sweetness of decay from the leaf litter under the trees. October in Peoria, my favorite month. The growing season winding down, the soil cooling, everything pulling inward for winter. Behind me, the greenhouse door stood open. Cedar frame, tempered glass, copper fittings. The hole where the deadbolt had been was filled with epoxy and sanded flush. You could find it if you ran your finger along the frame and knew where to look. I walked past it to the shiitake logs. The logs sat in the dark corner where they'd always been, white mycelium threading through the bark in patterns I'd been sketching in my Leatherfield journal for 3 years. I'd inoculated a new batch in September. 64 species identified now. The journal was getting thick. My phone buzzed on the armrest. A text from Tammy Sobieski, Rick's ex-wife. 487. Beat my own record. Triple word score on Quixotic. I typed back, "That's not a real word." 3 dots. Then, look it up, Tillerman. The business ran leaner without a second salary at the top. 11 employees still pulled into the yard off Route 29 every morning at 6:15. Same trucks, same routes, same work. Colton reached the far fence, turned the mower, and started back. Clean rows. No wasted passes. He didn't look up, didn't need to. The deck boards under my boots were pressure-treated pine I'd cut and laid myself. 16 by 12. Every screw countersunk. Every joist level. You treat a thing right, it lasts.